Okay, in this lesson we're going to talk about the function Date.IsInNextMonth. Now this is a really useful function that identifies dates in a table that are in the next month from the month that we're currently in. So for example, I'm currently recording this in December 2020, so when we look at some examples, the function is going to look for any dates that fall in January 2021. Now, this function works in exactly the same way as a number of other functions, including Date.IsInNextDay, Date.IsInNextWeek, Date.IsInNextQuarter, and Date.IsInNextYear. And they all work in the same sort of way. Now, this can once again be very useful for cash flow reporting. So, for example, identifying expected cash outflows for the next month based on an invoice payment date. So first of all, let's have a look at the function and its syntax and its use. So first of all, of course, we start off with the equal sign. Then we give the name of the type of the function, which is date, and then put in a full stop. And then we give the name of the function, which is in next month. Make sure, of course, that the is in next month all have capitals to start with. Now after that, we open the brackets and then put our first and only parameter, which is the date we want to evaluate to see whether the date is in the next month or not. Now this parameter can be a literal, which is where you manually key in the date that you want to check, or more commonly for us PowerQuery users, it'll be a column of dates. So once we've got the parameter in, then we can close the brackets. Then once you set the function off and running, then it will look through the dates in the parameter and then will return a nullable logical type. This means that it will essentially return a true or false value depending of course on whether the date that's being checked is in the next month or not. The nullable bit means that if the function encounters a value which means that it has to return a null for any reason, then the null won't result in an error. Now, as usual, I've come up with a couple of examples. So the first example is checking whether a literal date is in the next month or not. Now what we can see here in the function is date is in next month, then we open the brackets and put in the sign for the literal, which is a hashtag date, and then another set of brackets. So I've used today's date and then close the brackets. Now, of course, this function, if we put it into PowerQuery, would return a false value, as the date here is today's date, and today's date, of course, can't be in the next month. Now, the next example checks whether an invoice we've received is due for payment in the next month. Now, this time we start off, of course, with our function, and then open the brackets, and we then have our column name, expected payment date, and then we close the brackets. This function then checks whether the dates in the column expected payment date are in the next month or not. Finally, in our third example, I'm combining the Date.IsInNextMonth function with another function, and this time I'm using the function Date.AddDays. Now, this example is where we might see an invoice date column and a payment terms column, showing the amount of days after the invoice date that we need to pay, but then no payment due date column. So instead of creating a new payment due date column, we just put the two together. So what this example is showing us is it takes the invoice date, it adds on the amount of days in the payment terms by using the Date.AddDays function, and then evaluates the whole lot in a Date.IsInNextMonth function. So let's have a look at how all of these work in practice. Okay, so let's have a look at the invoice data set that we're going to use for this example. So over here on the left hand side, I've got highlighted the invoice number, then we've got the invoice value next to that, and crucially the invoice date. Then if I scroll across to the other side of the data set, we've also got payment terms and the expected payment date. So let's start off by checking whether the expected payment date is within the next month or not. So to do that, I'll go to the Add Column tab, which I've got highlighted, and then go to Custom Column. So up comes my custom column menu. I'll put in my new column name, which I'll say is Date.IsInNextMonth. And from there, I can put in my formula. So I'll go into the custom column formula section and then start off looking for my function. So there it is. So I'll press tab. Then get rid of the date at the beginning. And then I can open my brackets. Okay, then from here, all I need to do is just put in the date that we want to check, which in our case is the expected payment date column. And that's it. We now have a new column which has either true or false in it, just telling us whether the date in the expected payment date column is in the next month or not. So if I just filter on true, then we'll see how that's worked out. Okay, so there we go. Now we can see in the expected payment date column that all of the values in this column are in January. There's nothing in December 2020, there's nothing in February or beyond. And that's because the current recording date is the 1st of December. So PowerQuery just looks at the dates which are in January 2021. Okay, so then what would happen if we didn't have the expected payment date column? So let's get rid of the last few steps and also delete the expected payment date column. Okay, so now we no longer have the expected payment date column. So what we need to do is we need to utilize the invoice date column, which is over on the left-hand side. And then we need to use the payment terms column and add those two together to give an expected payment date column. Now we could do this just by adding those two columns together using a Date.IsInNextDay's formula, and that would come out with another column, and we could run our Date.IsInNextMonth function on that new column. Or alternatively, we can put the two together, which is what we're going to do here. So once again, I'll go to the Add Column tab and then go to Custom Column. Again, I'll call this new column Date.IsInNextMonth. Again, I'll put in the function. Now what we need to do is we need to give PowerQuery the column that we want it to check. So of course we now no longer have the expected payment date column. So what I'll do is I'm going to use the Date.addDays function to bring together the payment terms column and the invoice date column. So there we go. That function uses the invoice date column and then uses Date.addDays to add the number of days which is in the payment terms column. Now the last thing I need to do then is just close the brackets. And now we have our new column again. So all I need to do now, just to show you that we get the same result, is just to filter again this column to see which values are coming out as true. So there we go, our first line here. So the invoice date in this column is the 23rd of November 2020. So if we go across the payment terms column, we can see the payment terms is 45 days, which means that the invoice date plus that 45 would put the payment date or the expected payment date for this invoice into January 2021.